So hello everyone. So the topic that I'm bringing here today is rethinking AWS and Azure CloudOps for digital acceleration at scale. But before we get started, allow me to extend my introduction and tell you a bit where I'm coming from, um, and uh, and give a bit of context to where I'm working at. So I'm working at a company called Fortum. Fortum is an energy company from based in headquartered in Finland, but with a lot of operations in within Europe. We are actually one of the largest clean energy producer within Europe, and we do, of course, a lot of innovation and technology. I work as head of technology and architecture, so my role is to drive topics related with software engineering or how we do digital development, such as our technologies, our ways of working, and serving as a technical advisor also to different projects and also to our startup portfolio. I also work as an independent advisor, so I work also with a lot of companies, through especially in terms of technologies and even more especially on the topics related with cloud and DevOps and data. Um, you might be wondering, like, on an energy and utilities company, what do we do, like, in terms of technology? And I think our core mission is, of course, as technologists, is to create value from data and software. We are from our data and software development group, we are, of course, driving a lot of transformation and enabling this efficient use of data and digital solutions. There's a few like angles to this. One is that, of course, how we enable new ideas and the digital as a growth engine. Also, how we accelerate the overall employee on how they can do analytics, how can they do citizen development, low code, no code, overall driving for operational efficiency. And we will touch a bit more on this particular three topics. Of course, we have all the internal technology competences. So we have developers, we have data scientists, the DevOps engineers, solution architects, data analysts, you name it. So we had a full-fledged internal competence group. But we also extend that with few selected strategic partners, both technology partners and consulting partners. And also, one of the things that we do quite a lot is technology advisory. So enabling overall the group to drive and different businesses to drive their technology strategy, and work with our engineering teams to ensure that there's good solid technology foundations that they drive also for software engineering excellence. A few of the things that you might be wondering, what kind of things that you actually develop, and I think that's a fair question, because I don't think it's obvious in energy and utilities, like what kind of things we do. And I think the first thing that you need to understand is that we have different business units, what we will call the typical enterprise business units. In our case, we have generation, trading, and asset optimization. So a lot of solutions related with how we optimize energy trading and optimize the energy consumption and generation. And then we also have district heating and recycling and waste. So things, for instance, like the heating and cooling, or things like recycling of materials such as batteries, or recycling of metals. So a lot of solutions, digital solutions on that. So of course touches a lot of logistics as well. And then consumer facing solutions, where things like for you as an electricity consumer, your mobile application to check your electricity bill and how much you are actually consuming, how predicting those costs. And then those are just kind of few examples. And then, of course, we also have our startup ecosystem. So we have a lot of ventures that either are spin off from our group or that we acquired. And we have our own actually VC and all portfolio companies as part of that. And we, as Fortum Technologies, of course, we are driving all of this. So our folks can work in a startup, but then after 1 year they can rotate to a different for a more enterprise, let's say, application. So there's also this kind of flexibility. So we need to, when we think about technology strategy and governance, we need a lot of flexibility also because of this. When cloud is, of course, one of our, let's say, engines, let's put it like that. It is an ecosystem, and it is a big part of how you can do digital acceleration. But I think the challenge is that when you think about enterprises, the cloud adoption path is not so straightforward. And typically, not just in Fortum, but actually in most of enterprises, initially it starts by something that is driven by internal IT. Your internal IT wants to start leveraging cloud, and that's how that cloud starts, because they want, maybe they want better capacity planning, or they want to enable some speed and agility, or the typical, we want to focus on the business, not on our own data centers. And that's usually how the journey starts to most companies. And then over time, or within a few months or a few years, of course, you start to see some signals from that. One is that your capex goes down. You spend less money in buying buying servers and buying hardware, and your operational expenses go up because you go as a pay-as-you-go model, and you have more flexibility. And you see that with the cloud adoption, also new competences are created, new technology competences start to emerge within the organization, and there's a huge increase on your R&D and innovation. So you start to build new digital solutions as part of that, because you have a lot more flexibility to use the components of cloud. Of course, one thing that maybe goes a bit unnoticed is that with all of this flexibility on how people can get new cloud environments or new servers or new managed databases, or etc., your internal IT starts struggling to cope with all of this flexibility, let's put it like that. So flexibility has a cost in terms of governance, let's put it like that. And I think that the challenge that over time, things that on premise were very centralized in terms of like how the things are governed, what can people do with servers, like what are the processes, you cannot really apply them to cloud, because it is a mindset shift and things do change. So it becomes more decentralized. And that, of course, with that maturity of decentralized IT and that speed and agility, you start to build as a company more advanced and complex digital solutions, which is fantastic. You start maybe experimenting with IoT. You start maybe doing some machine learning. So you start doing a bit, also leveraging different technology areas. But you start to seeing that perhaps for you to create a new cloud environment, or for you to request something, you still need to go through that internal IT, which is struggling, and that starts to be a bottleneck. It starts to be you need to make a lot of tickets quite often. So things that's supposed to be simple take a lot of time, and you're wondering like, how can we do a bit better? Also, of course, from an internal IT perspective, they are not so used to work with digital development. So they start to think of this as shadow IT, and there's a bit of fragmented governance. So those are typical problems that most enterprises face throughout the cloud. So I think it is important that we take that into perspective, meaning that the typical cloud operating model is that you have your internal IT applications that you are either using as a SaaS, think like Office 365, think like Google Drive, or that you are perhaps purchasing from a vendor and self-hosting into virtual machines or into containers, and and managed databases. And those are like your internal kind of enterprise IT applications, your core IT applications. And then on the other end, you have the AI and data teams, you have the DevOps teams, you have innovation and venturing teams that are developing, deploying, and operating new solutions and building them by customly building. Yet most enterprises, they treat these two different branches exactly the same. So the same hoops that a development team needs to jump is the same of an IT service manager that just wants to purchase an application. And it becomes a bottleneck over time. And that becomes a bit of a struggle on how we can actually do innovation. How can you do experimentation if takes you, if you want to do experimentation in a scope of a few weeks, and it takes you, let's say, 2 or 3 weeks just to get started with the environments that you need as a developer, that doesn't really work, right? So it is important that we, from engineering or from technology governance, and strategy, we start thinking a bit, why does this happen? how can we actually think from the different perspectives? And it is important that we start by differentiating these two worlds. And this is something that most IT, either if you're working in your CIO office or CTO office, this is a type of discussion that doesn't usually happen in the companies, or happens in a very frictional manner, which is that you have different profiles that have different needs, expectations, and frustrations. And it is important to understand and distinguish both. So in one side, you might have a service manager that, that person is accountable to have for an IT, core IT application or enterprise application, regardless what you call it, which might be your Office 365 or M365, might be your Google Drive, might be any kind of thing, application that we are basically purchasing and not building ourselves, right? And this person is the interface, and the business stakeholders are expecting him, let's call him John, to deliver an excellent IT service experience. He has a budget for the application. He just wants to run it and to configure it. On the other hand, we have digital development teams, which might be a data engineering team, might be an innovation and venturing team, might be a DevOps team that has a completely different type of need and expectations. Usually you have a product owner, let's call it Johanna, and she has with her a team that it is a group of people that might be a tech lead, different developers, front end, back end, UX, a UI, might be a DevOps, a solution architect, might be a quality assurance, with different compositions as a team. And this person is the product owner that, she wants to build and work alongside that team to deliver a successful digital product or service for, in our case, Fortum customers. So the expectations and needs are completely different, yet we tend to treat it the same. So how can we actually start rethinking this model? One is that we need to start evolving as companies to think from a cloud by operating model, meaning that we distinguish the two worlds. And for that, we need to think about cloud and DevOps from a different angle, which is that from almost like a product angle. Meaning that if you think about this type of customers, we internally, this is how we actually productize our models. Of course, each company might do things a bit different, but as an example, we productize in three manners. We have three, almost like if you go to a fast food chain and you have something on the menu, different customers have different things that they want on that menu. And in this case, we have three things on the menu. One is something that goes into the digital acceleration, digital acceleration from how, as a company, people can start learning about cloud and experimenting with cloud. And for that, we have something called personal sandbox. How do we actually give environments? If someone wants to try to use Microsoft Azure or wants to use AWS, how can they can start experimenting with it? So this type of environments or this type of products are temporary by nature, and it is something that has a different kind of more basic set of guidelines. Let's say, like, there's not really something that you're going to put company data to it. Is this something that's going to maybe expire after X amount of days? Is something that there's no network connectivity to the rest of the internal company environments or things like that. So it's really just for you to experiment. And then two other models, one for the Johns of the world or the IT service managers that they want to self-host an application that we are purchasing. It's a very standard environment. Usually have either containers or virtual machines with managed databases. Is what we call the managed cloud or core IT application hosting, where you have a very, very standard workload that there's already a certain degree of network isolation by default, and then connections or integration points need to be established based on the need. And then you have some, you might have some internet access in and out, but it is restricted by default, and it needs to be evaluated what is needed. So it's a bit like, from a service management experience, should be almost like a hands-off approach. This is not the person who's going to go and deploy and go to the machine and do things. So they want that type of almost like internal SaaS experience. And then, on the other hand, for digital development, it's for the developers essentially, to have a great software engineering experience, to have a great developer experience. We need to make sure that a development team, they have end-to-end ownership. That they, it's not that they are developing and someone else is deploying or operating. No, the team itself needs to be accountable and have the ownership to develop, test, deploy, operate as they need. Usually the type of architectures, of course, are more flexible, more complex. Usually you are dealing with either event-driven things like with AWS Lambda, or you might be really working with microservices. So the type of architectures are, of course, a bit more complex. And you need, of course, more, you need to have some network isolation, but you also you might need to expose API endpoints and things like that to the internet. So needs to be a bit of flexibility. Also, we are talking usually about having 3 separate environments, dev, stage, prod, the typical type of scenario. So trying to productize help to think and help explain also internally what are people's expectations towards cloud. When we think about these 2 worlds, and if you think about that picture that I was sharing before, we are, of course, we need to evolve that picture. We need to separate those 2 worlds into the different realities. Yet, of course, there's a lot of things that are similar. So, it's not potatoes and oranges, it's maybe apples and oranges. They're both fruits, but they're a little bit different. So there's a lot of similarities that can be, and a lot of synergies that can be established by these 2 worlds, but acknowledging the differences is the first stepping stone. And with here also, because the maturity of the companies grow more, there's more competences that are coming, that start to emerge. Things like low code, no code, or BI and analytics, or data science are things that perhaps with a low maturity within cloud and DevOps, of course, it usually doesn't happen. But over time, it will either happen organically or it will, and it's something that you can already take into account, or then is something that will just happen and you just get all of that out of the blue and you don't know how to deal with those. Of course, here also there's a component or a layer of how do you govern this and how you do risk and compliance, that it should be virtual, it should be lean, that you shouldn't have very big structures of approvals. You need to drive for a more automated, more self-service type of environments and ways of working. And this distinction is important. And of course, in the scope of my work and in the scope of this, I will focus on the digital development side. So how do we do digital acceleration? How having this distinction is the first stepping stone to that. One thing that we started to create in parallel is something that we call Rapid Development Hub. And Rapid Development Hub is an idea that started to emerge and started to mature over time on how we can empower anyone in Fortum to experiment with a digital idea in the scope of 6 weeks. So if you are a Fortum employee, which you are, I'm guessing most of you are not, but if you are some colleagues, I would like to say hi. And if you are someone from Fortum, we wanted to give the chance that no matter where you are in the organization, that if you have an idea or something that can be done differently with digital technologies, can we do technical feasibility or proof of concept in the scope of 6 weeks? This was our kind of engine for how to enable the acceleration. And of course, it starts off having like a multidisciplinary team that we have, that we call a hybrid rapid development team. You have designers, you have data engineers, you have developers, you have advisory, and you have a kind of a core group of people that help people to collect ideas, that engage with these inventors, that do this, of course, the 6-week sprint, and then that can present results to wider audience, and then can hand over, meaning that we can then help the person to discuss about should we continue this or not, and what was the outcome of it. And of course, this is highly supported by a virtual extension body, as you might expect, where you have different business enablers of different business people that can help also both in the beginning and at the end of the cycle, especially on prioritizing ideas and also how to take them forward. And also, of course, different technical competence leads, meaning that that are very involved and see how if there is something that they should be more, if it's an idea where their team should be contributing as well. And of course, this is a bit idealistic. I mean, let's face it, we knew that it was not going to be challenges, but the challenge or part of the challenge that we immediately saw was that, 6 weeks to do something, if it takes you 2 or 3 weeks just to get the tools that you need, is not going to fly. So we needed that. We know that we knew back then, and we know now that if we want to accelerate and really deliver in 6 weeks, we need to shorten the time that this team has into provisioning environments and getting the tools, all the tools that they need. It might be like a software engineering tool, might be a cloud environment, might be access to API catalogs and things like that. So this was this particular thing fed a lot into how we started to think about cloud and DevOps from that by operating model. And to do that, we have to establish a platform engineering team. And of course, platform engineering, I know that is, especially now in DevOps, people see it in a very, very different manners. Most people tend to think as a team that manages the Kubernetes clusters for others. That's not how we see it. Meaning that we don't do dev plus ops. Each team is empowered. We needed a platform engineering team from the perspective of creating the foundations for self-service and automation. So our platform engineering team has essentially one mission, which is enabling a great service management experience and software development experience. And to do that, I like this definition of digital platform by Evan Butcher. It's widely known as this definition. There's a very interesting article about that. But he says that the digital platform is a foundation of self-service APIs, tools, services, knowledge, and support, which are arranged as a compelling internal product. And I think the self-service angle and the knowledge and the APIs as an internal product is a very powerful message, because nothing here is saying about that you need to operate, that you need to do operations for developers. It's not about that, right? This is about really teaching them how to fish rather than giving them a fish. So this touches a lot about also how you do governance and accelerate that. So how you do cloud management, how you do the software tooling management. So when we think about this as a growth engine for digital acceleration, I think these two realities come together. One is that on the top, we have the digital development teams, which one of them obviously is the Rapid Development Hub. And it is important that, as mentioned, that each team has the end-to-end responsibility. We don't want to do dev plus ops. We want the team to be empowered. So if the team is multidisciplinary, if they have designers, if they have developers, if they have QA, if they have a DevOps engineer, they should have all the competencies to do this. So we want them to have the full ownership and responsibility over their cloud infrastructure, things like monitoring, alerting, vulnerability management, incident response. Yet we don't want them to do this in isolation. We want them to have a great experience, which means, for instance, how they can provision environments. How can they provisioning new things? How do we enable that automation? All the things from the cloud management perspective. And here is where CloudOps and platform engineering comes into play. So this particular team was fundamental, actually, to start creating the foundations to enable this experience, meaning that this team is doing things like this type of self-service capabilities, reference implementations for both, DevSecOps, cloud, integrations with our security operations center, doing a lot of the heavy lifting from the perspective of reference implementations that makes it easy enough to make reusable templates for teams, not the perspective of operating those set workloads. And here also comes into play on how does this team feed both the core IT needs and digital development needs, and how it connects with different competencies such as our cybersecurity, our network team, identity and access management, so that the teams don't have to figure out all the time who should they contact if they want to know more about this. So this also provides one single interface to teams for digital development teams on how they can actually do some of the maybe heavy lifting parts that might not be so explicit, and that maybe they don't even have either the knowledge or they might not have the tools within their cloud environment to do it. One feeds the other one. Also, for both for the platform engineering team, having a team like Rapid Development Hub that has this 6 weeks timeline to actually come up with new ideas is a good thing, because it actually sets a bit the expectations on how we can enable, what kind of things are really needed to get things off the ground. And thus, with that, I mean, we as an example, we officially launched the Rapid Development Hub in January, even though it's been a bit running for a while. But very quickly, we started to get a lot of ideas across the org. And to be able to answer that, we need to have the automation and the self-service capabilities. Otherwise, we don't scale, right? So one of the key things was also to, when we think about this dimensions, is about how do we actually enable different teams, different digital development teams, to understand what is available and what kind of expectations are needed from them. So one of the tools that we are using to do this is called Backstage.io. It's a tool that was developed by Spotify, but now it's been incubated in the Cloud Computing Network Foundation, Native Foundation, so CNCF. It is a tool that I highly encourage you, either if you're a single team or if you have multiple teams in your company, to explore. There's a little bit for everyone, to be honest. One of the key things that we started with this tool 1.5 years ago was to create our technology radar, which is not this picture. This is the demo picture that you see, but it gives you a perception of how the information is there. So if you know about Zalando Technology Radar, very similar type of structure. So 4 quadrants, and with that, we essentially, what are the technologies that we encourage the teams to use, or what technologies that some teams are trying, maybe some technologies that we want to hold. And this is curated not just by this platform engineering team or rapid development. This is curated by the entire Fortum technology community. So anyone can actually make a pull request to this and share more about that. Also, we use it as part of our templates and builders library. So all of these reference implementations that different teams were essentially driven mostly by the platform engineering team, but anyone can actually contribute to it. So if, let's say that one team is doing with GitHub Actions, they have an example of how to do certain things with GitHub Actions. They can take that as a reference implementation and publish in the builders library. So that helps other teams to get started with GitHub Actions. So those type of, that helps us also to share that knowledge. One also thing that I'm very proud that we did very recently was about the core IT and the digital development handbook, which is a 1.5 pages long, and it's as a document and basically a collection of different must-haves and should-haves for across different areas such as cloud, code management, governance, and this sets the expectations for all the teams on what is really expected for them. Because usually in big companies, or actually big to medium companies, you often have this, this saying of like, oh, we need to do this according with our policy, or this needs to be this way because we have a policy. And where's this policy written? Dozens of documents spread all around. So with the handbook, we basically compile what are really the must-haves, what are the should-haves, what are the recommended things, and where can you actually find those documents. So this helps people for development teams to understand what is really expected from us, and lowers also the cognitive overload on where they can find information. Another thing that we use Backstage IO is for API catalog. So we can publish all the teams can publish their APIs, and that helps also for teams like the Rapid Development Hub to understand what is available when you are experimenting. Like, okay, to solve this type of business problem in 6 weeks, we will need to have this type of data. Do we have an API that provides that internally? That helps them also the cycle to understand what is possible in the scope of 6 weeks. And one also thing that we use this for is, of course, to drive the self-service. So things like the provision in new cloud environments. So that type of product approach that I was sharing and building the automations related with that, and also software tools. Let's say like you need a new GitHub environment or something like that. We are building as part of the Backstage. So it becomes one internal developer portal, one internal technology portal that helps people to discover information and take actions. And that's incredibly valuable. Of course, under the hood, I mean, this is just let's say the shell. Under the hood, there's a lot of things that drive through that. And one of our particular challenges from an automation perspective is that we, in terms of cloud strategy, we have a multi-cloud strategy, meaning that we use both AWS and Azure, which doesn't mean that our workloads need to run in AWS and Azure. It just means that we have certain teams that are using AWS and we have certain teams that are using Microsoft Azure. And why is this important for us? Because we are a very large group, and we have, in a lot of situations, companies that we acquire, companies that we carve out, or parts of the business that we carve out. So we have a very large footprint in both, and we have teams operating in both. So when you think about from an automation perspective, we have to have a few ways to handle both. And of course, when you think about these two environments or these two cloud ecosystems, if you break it down to the basic building blocks, there's a lot of similarities. I mean, if you think about compute, you have the same type of functionalities in both AWS and Azure. Same with network, same with storage, same with security and identity, right? But we had to think about, even though they did have a lot of similarities, there's of course significant differences, even from a cloud management or cloud governance, how you provision environments and things like that. How do you create new Azure subscriptions or AWS accounts? There's those differences came into play very quickly, right? And we had to acknowledge those differences and also try to navigate in the sense of we need to make sure that our processes and our ways of working on how we provision those environments and how we manage those environments, that there's a certain degree of similarity between both. So, of course, there is things like, if you think about from an Azure perspective, having a subscription or a resource group is not the same. And there's already like a difference that needs to be one, should we provision to the team's resource groups or Azure subscriptions? Also, from the perspective of AWS, if you provision AWS accounts, like what kind of O's should we put, what kind of policies you do, what kind of costs, how you do the network topology. So how you do that organizational structure, because of course you need to have some distinction between both this core IT and digital development, but even between those, the different environments and different expectations, they do match. Also, one big thing was in infrastructure as code, and here I think there was a bit of interesting findings from our perspective. Even though as a company we use mostly Terraform, but we had some pockets of, for instance, using CloudFormation, and here we, instead of taking maybe a very technology approach or very engineering approach, I think most of people, when you think like, well, let's automate Azure subscriptions, or let's automate the creation of AWS accounts, you start jumping to code very quickly. We actually took a bit one step back on this. On overall, we started with the experience. What is the user journey? So now that we have, the Johns and the Johannes, what is their expectation, what is their journey on how does the process work from the perspective of, if you have a new idea and is a rapid development hub, how does that idea come into light? When do we actually start, and what are the steps? For instance, like, do they need to have a budget? If they need to have a budget, what is the process to get the budget? Can we automate that? So thinking about this, maybe mapping the user journey for both, in this case, mostly Johanna at start, and the developers, it helps us to also identify problematic areas or things that perhaps will be time consuming, meaning that, for instance, running a CloudFormation or Terraform, that's fast. But if you need to wait quite a lot of time internally to get a new AD group for and establish the SSO, while you are already kind of having a bottleneck there. So it helps us also to understand from our current state what were the things that were a bit more challenging at the time, and it helps us also to prioritize where we put the focus. Then when we started also to explore the self-service and the automation part, so a lot of ideation and prototyping, we come into a challenge, which was that the level of maturity in certain things in Terraform for AWS and Azure was not really the same. And that helps us also to think about how we actually start, can instead of doing perfect on the ball, can we actually do small increments? And one of the things that, for instance, we did is that we took advantage of certain native resources that both Microsoft and AWS were providing. For instance, in Azure, you have enterprise landing zones, and in AWS, there's the innovation sandbox. And we started to use those. Those, of course, are based ARM templates and CloudFormation templates, so not ideally what we wanted, but that helps us to, starting with that, we were able to abstract that into creating a Terraform that as a baseline model that then other teams could use and connect their existing EIC to that. So I think it was a bit, maybe if I take one big lesson from that, is that how do you balance that short-term versus long-term? Because if we had gone for we need to do everything with Terraform, or we need to do it in this specific way to have it perfect with all these features, we will never be able to be agile enough to validate that with the people actually needing it. So having short-term focus that allows us to put something internally out there that, for instance, Rapid Development Hub could start using, that helps us a lot to also gain these new learnings. And that was like an incredible lesson for both understanding how to do this at scale. Maybe one last thought about this is that quite often companies talk a lot about customer experience, that we need to be customer centric, and obviously, nobody is wrong when they say that. Of course, the company only exists because of its customers, but for you to have a great customer experience, you need to have first a great employee experience. So if your employees, if your service managers cannot do certain things to serve customers, it's not going to fly, right? You're not going to have a great customer experience. And if you narrow even that more, if you want to do digital acceleration at scale, you have to have a great software engineering experience. If your engineers cannot really cope, and if they are fiddling their thumbs, waiting for quite a lot of things like a new cloud environment, it's not going to be a great experience. It's a lot of time wasted. So maybe the word is, think about engineering experience first if you are building digital solutions, which will translate in a better employee experience and, of course, over time, great customer experience. And now, big thanks for listening to me. I hope you have some questions, some feedback. Feel free to reach out on Twitter or LinkedIn, and I will give the word back to the studio.